What does a werewolf look like? Well, it depends. The image of the wolf man is such a powerful one that werewolves are recognizable across many cultures and countries. But depictions of what a werewolf actually looks like vary wildly. In today's video, we're going to find out what a werewolf really looks like by exploring the anatomy of a werewolf. So, how does a werewolf work? Before we get into the gritty details of what a werewolf might look like, we need to address two things a werewolf is not. First, werewolves aren't just wolves with human faces glued onto them. Sorry, Hollywood. That's just wrong. Not only would gluing a face to a wolf be incredibly difficult, given the differences in skull shape between canines and humans, werewolves are usually depicted as being much larger than wolves. In fact, some legends say that werewolves can reach the size of bears, which can measure up to around 6 feet in length and weigh about 200 pounds. Second, werewolves aren't just humans who turn into wolves either. Werewolves are usually described as having characteristics of both wolves and humans, but combining the skeletal structures of these two animals doesn't really make much sense either. Wolves have far longer and more slender limbs than humans, which would make for an awkward combination. And trying to walk on all fours as an adult human is pretty difficult, even if you had the proper skeletal structure for it. You'd have to do some serious yoga to get there. The reason we know werewolves aren't just wolves or humans is because of lycanthropy, which is the condition of being a werewolf. In order to be a werewolf, you have to be born with it. It's passed down through bloodlines, and anyone who inherits the trait will turn into a werewolf upon the death of their father. This is why, in many stories, werewolves are referred to as sons of the wolf. They are literally the children of the wolf. So now we know that werewolves are neither wolves nor humans. There's something in between. Let's take a look at some actual werewolves from fiction to see just how different their anatomy can be. The first werewolf we're going to examine is the one from the movie The Wolf Man. He's probably the most famous werewolf in modern culture and thus serves as a good example of how werewolves are typically portrayed. The Wolf Man's human form is Larry Talbot. Played by Lon Chaney Jr. in his human form, Larry seems fairly normal. Aside from his general air of melancholia, there's nothing particularly monstrous about him. However, when he transforms, he becomes an absolutely hulking beast. His face elongates and his jaw becomes more pronounced, making him look more reptilian than wolf-like. His hands become clawed and his teeth are shown to be long and fang-like. His eyes glow green and his fur is messy and dark. Despite his relatively human-like facial features, the Wolf Man is definitely more brute than brains. He acts on pure instinct and goes after the nearest person he sees, even though it's clear that they mean him no harm. There's no real explanation ever given for exactly what kind of creature the Wolf Man is, or where he came from. But his portrayals certainly had an impact on future werewolves. Moving away from movies and into books, let's examine the werewolf depiction from the Witcher series. As many of you might already know, werewolves appear in the world of The Witcher, which has been adapted into a popular Netflix show. In the books and games, werewolves are monsters, full stop. There's no such thing as lycanthropy. Rather, werewolves are created when a human is bitten by a werewolf. However, this isn't an instant transformation. Werewolves are born with animal-like features and grow increasingly monstrous until they eventually turn into a wolf-human hybrid when they reach adulthood. These werewolves are physically stronger and more agile than humans, but are also driven by strong animalistic urges and possess vicious tempers. Their appearance is described as somewhere between a man and a wolf, with their most monstrous traits being their elongated snouts and glowing yellow eyes. This sounds pretty similar to another well-known monster, the Gorgon. In fact, in some depictions, werewolves are said to be the offspring of Gorgons. Let's take a look at a werewolf that has a bit more humanity. No pun intended. In the Harry Potter universe, werewolves aren't necessarily evil creatures. In fact, the main werewolf in the series is a good guy. Remus Lupin, as his name suggests, was unfortunately bullied as a child for being a werewolf and spent much of his life avoiding others. He was forced to leave Hogwarts early and spent most of his time alone. The only times he could socialize with others was during the full moon when he transformed into a werewolf. In his human form, Remus Lupin appears to be completely normal. In fact, he's quite attractive, which makes sense considering that he was sorted into the house of a noble lion. In his werewolf form, however, Lupin is quite monstrous looking. His muzzle is elongated and pointed, and his eyes are yellow. His limbs become more animalistic and furry, and his teeth sharpen into fangs. Although he's a good guy, it's clear that Lupin's werewolf form is still dangerous. When he transforms, he loses control over his actions and is driven purely by instinct. Because of this, he prefers to stay away from other people during the full moon, since he could hurt someone without meaning to. Now let's look at a werewolf who's all too eager to embrace his inner beast. Jacob Black from the Twilight series is perhaps the most famous werewolf in modern media, even more so than the Wolfman. Jacob's story begins like many werewolves in fiction. He's a young Native American boy whose father left the family when Jacob was very young. His father, Billy, was a werewolf, and this is where Jacob gets his lycanthropic powers. When Jacob reaches puberty, he begins his transformation into a werewolf. Over the course of the series, we see him transform several times, and his appearances vary depending on how far along he is in his change. In his earlier transformations, Jacob retains much of his human shape, but his arms become more furry and his nails become claws. His teeth also grow longer, and he has a pronounced underbite. His eyes glow yellow, and he grows a tail. In his fully transformed state, Jacob looks like a large gray wolf, although he's still clearly humanoid in shape. His legs are much longer than those of an actual wolf, and he walks on two legs. In this form, he's nearly 7 feet tall and extremely muscular. He also has abnormally long arms, with each arm being covered in thick fur. While fictional werewolves are interesting, it's important to remember that werewolves in mythology are much more monstrous. Most mythical werewolves don't have cool names like the Wolfman or Jacob. They're simply referred to as wild men or hairy wild men. Oftentimes, these beings are said to live in forests and attack unsuspecting travelers. This is because werewolves in mythology are associated with the wilderness and the untamed aspects of nature. Because of this association with the wild, werewolves in mythology were seen as evil creatures, while werewolves in fiction tend to be more sympathetic. Instead of evil wild men, we get sad and misunderstood teenagers who just want a friend. Werewolves in mythology and folklore are not just said to attack passersby, but also livestock, especially sheep. They supposedly tear apart their prey with their sharp claws and teeth, devouring them whole. Werewolves are also known for howling at the moon, although the origins of this behavior are unclear. One theory says that werewolves howl to communicate with other werewolves, while another theory says that they do it to summon other wolves to their side. Regardless of the true origin of this behavior, werewolves have been associated with the moon since the Middle Ages. This is likely because werewolves were often said to be active during the full moon, which is believed to be the time when they transform. This connection between werewolves and the moon is still prevalent today. Just think of all the times that werewolves transformed during the full moon in the Wolfman, Teen Wolf, Twilight, and so many other stories. Werewolves are truly fascinating creatures, and they seem to have captured the human imagination like no other monster. Whether they're tragic figures like the Wolfman or cool characters like Jacob, werewolves continue to appear in our stories. We have a lot of respect for these creatures, so we'll leave you with one last picture of Jacob in his full werewolf glory. Thanks for watching, everyone. What do you think? How does a werewolf work to you? Share your thoughts below. And please subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.